Hey everyone, welcome back to the Product Tales podcast. I'm your host, Giulia, and in each episode, I sit down with product leaders, experts, and innovators to share their experiences and insights on how to build better software products and teams. This podcast is brought to you by Dummi. Dummi is a Chrome extension that helps product teams create instant, one-click bug reports with video replay and technical info, making it super easy to share and solve software issues fast when you're testing software. Click the link on the show notes to get started today for free, or go to Dummi, dummi.com. Today, I'm excited to be joined by Farran Jonker, the product manager at Trail, a CRM platform for financial brokers in New Zealand. Farran is passionate about how culture can make or break product teams, especially when managing teams remotely across different countries and time zones. In this episode, we dive into how he's built high-performing, cohesive teams across borders, the importance of culture-first leadership, and his personal tips for creating trust and alignment in remote product teams. So, if you're curious about how to navigate the complexities of managing global teams and want to learn practical strategies to foster strong culture remotely, you won't want to miss this episode. Let's get into it. Hi, Farran. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Hey, Giulia. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
So, Farran is the product manager at Trail. I'm super excited about our conversation today since Farran is such an advocate for workplace culture and how you can leverage your business culture to create cohesive and strong product teams, even if you're working with teams across different countries. So more on that later, but before we get started talking about culture, tell me a little bit about why you're passionate about product building.
It probably stems from my background. I studied to be a programmer, and when I started at Trail, I started in support. I was meant to be a salesperson actually, but that definitely didn't work out. I was exposed to product a lot in that support team. You learn about your users, you learn about the product, and then ultimately you work with the devs and the product manager at the time. And I found that I love the idea of being able to push a vision forward and create something out of nothing, essentially, and bring value to your users and ultimately an industry. So it's super exciting. I love it.
And just so we have a little bit of more context, who is currently part of the product and development team at Trail that you manage, and where is everyone based?
Great question. So I manage the product side of the business, where in this case that involves the project managers. So I have two product owners that plan projects and see them through to implementation. I have a UI UX designer, and I also manage the support team as well, as that's where we get our primary feedback from our users. On the other side, the development, I work together with the development lead. His name is Zui, and we have a product team based out in Vietnam, where we have about 7 developers, of course, some front end, some back end, and some full stack.
And how did you find initially working with a team in a different country?
Difficult. I mean, it's hard, right? I think first of all, it really stems from culture. I had to learn just because I manage my team here in New Zealand a certain way, and we work in a certain way. We approach work in a different way. It's maybe it's just my team, but it's a very like emotional experience as well as a work-based logic experience. Where for me, my management style of the New Zealand team is very much like, I have one-on-ones regularly with the team, and in those one-on-ones, they're very much like 70% how's life, how are you doing in life, and then 30% work, how can we continue a professional development. When it comes to the Vietnamese team, I don't directly manage them together with Zui, but I do talk with them quite a lot. And when I started, I also took the same approach towards them. How's life, how's it going? And I remember I just get met with blank looks like, why are we talking about this? Like, this is so irrelevant. And I was like, oh, okay. So like at its core, culture was like quite a big shock for me, because they just want to go straight to the task at hand. What's the sprint? What's the due dates? What are we doing? And I found that was like quite an important thing to understand, is that you need to learn about the people you're working with, both here in New Zealand and Vietnam, and what actually makes them tick, and what are their priorities in work. So that was the first challenge.
How did you guys originally go about finding a team overseas? Because I'm sure that a lot of people are
Mm.
curious about how you would actually execute that and then long term make sure that it is a success.
We're a little bit lucky in that Zui, the guy who manages the development team, is Vietnamese. He comes from a software engineering background, and he actually used to be a lecturer in Vietnam. And through those connections and the networking that he's done, we managed to slowly start building a team of people that we trusted through Zui. And that's really what the core of it was for us, trusting Zui that he could bring on people that he believed could push our vision forward and have a strong work culture in Vietnam. We actually have a second team that we're building in the Philippines, and we've tackled that very differently. So this one was mainly through different agencies that we tried to look for. And these are like a typical option that I found other businesses approach, where you can find agencies that will manage most of the process for you. And you pay them like a flat fee per employee per month. Again, very different challenges. In Vietnam, we wanted to have our own office for the devs so they could go in every day. But in the Philippines, it's again, the culture is different. Manila is like a crazy place, and it's just not expected that anyone goes into the office. So we had to learn that what we're going to be doing is managing people working from home, which is fine. It comes with its own set of challenges. But what we did is we hired one person in the Philippines that we kind of got on recommendation, as well as like we vetted from like a culture standpoint. And again, it's a lot of trust. You kind of just put your trust in this one person. We've kind of built him up and taught him a lot more about the way that we operate. And then through that, he's been our main liaison to then go out and find other people and basically acting like a manager of that whole country, essentially.
Right.
And so that's really like how we've managed to overcome these challenges. It's a lot of trust, but it's also culture fit, trying to find the right people to put your trust in, which is difficult, but it pays off in the end.
And for those people that you're hiring, you mentioned that the culture of each country is slightly different to the New Zealand culture. How do you then hire for culture if the culture is not the same? Do you find that the values are still in alignment, but there's maybe some nuances? Or yeah, what's your take on that?
When you're hiring for people that you're working with directly, culture becomes a huge factor in how you end up working together. But when you're working internationally, like you've recognized, it's more about, do their values align with the others in the office that they'll be working with, or the others that they'll be working with remotely? Ultimately, like, what's their attitude towards working for an international business? Like, do they understand that, you know, there is a lot more autonomy in there? Do they come off as someone who's driven and independent? So when we hired for the Vietnam team, for example, Zui would go through it and initially vet them from like a expertise standpoint, and he would do an interview in Vietnamese. We had a few requirements, right? Like, they're going to be speaking English with us because they interact with me. And look, I'm trying to learn Vietnamese. It's quite hard. So I do still speak English, and that's a requirement. Beyond that, what we would do is that once we agreed to take someone on board, we would kind of like trial them. So they would go into the office in Vietnam, and essentially we would get the existing team members to interact with them and see if they get along, because the Vietnamese team have built their own culture internally. They've got their own way of working besides just interacting with us as a product. They've got their own team dynamic when we're not there. What we do is we've got an office manager there. His name's Sut, and we get him to basically report back. Like, honestly, it's like a vibe check. It's like, do they vibe with the guys? Because
Yeah.
if they don't vibe with them, then it's going to be a little bit more abrasive probably in the office. And they don't want that as much as we don't want that, because we've instilled in them that, like, this is how we operate in New Zealand. We're friends, right? And we believe that that's where we can create like a lot of respect and trust, and therefore push things forward through having open conversation. And I feel like they've taken on board that culture too, which is something they love. And so now they're expecting the same of the new employees there.
Right. So it sounds like the way that you go about it is to find one person that's either there or has strong ties to where you're trying to hire for the team, and then get them to then do the hiring process to make sure that the team is cohesive in that country. So I'm pretty keen to zoom in a little bit into the relationship between the team in Vietnam and the Philippines, and also in New Zealand. It sounds like at the beginning of the working relationship, there were some bumps in the road. Can you tell me a little bit more about the bumps in the road and how you guys overcame those bumps to now?
What most people will fear is that because you're not physically there and able to have oversight, they're not working as effectively as you might think they could be. And we've definitely had bumps in the road about that. I can give you two examples. In the Vietnam team, we gave them a lot of autonomy. We would set up a sprint and say, like, look, if you've got your work, you've got your due dates. If you can smash those out at high quality, it's great. What we found was that, especially post-COVID, because we started hiring them, I think, just before COVID really kicked off, work from home's become like quite a common thing, right? Like, I'm in my home office right now, and that's fine. But the difference is that when we're here in New Zealand, we work on the same time zone. We can contact each other through like text as much as Slack. And we're coming into the office like 2 to 3 times a week at least. We found that the Vietnam team were, I guess, being quite liberal with this, which is fine. But the quality of work and the ability to get an urgent response out of them was starting to diminish for one reason or another. And so we sent Zui over there essentially because we wanted to talk to them about the importance of like working in an office together, the fact that we have an office for them, and the fact that we believe that the hybrid work situation is hybrid for a reason, because when you come together, you build culture. When you come together, you can work closely together, understand each other, react to things faster, and enjoy your work a lot more. The conclusion we came to for the Vietnamese team specifically was installing an ability for them to report in when they've reached the office and when they leave. And that, understandably, to begin with, I could relate to this. It comes off a little bit like, oh, you're just monitoring us. And it's just,
Totally.
It wasn't about that. It was about, first of all, safety. Are they okay? If one says that they're on their way to the office and doesn't show up for hours, it's like, okay, that's concerning. But also it was just a way for Zui, who's on the other side of the world, essentially, to know that the team members are actually coming together and working effectively. It's funny. The system we installed is called Happy Time. I'll put that out there. And the irony of it, I think the funny thing is that honestly, the team is working so much more effectively now. And it does genuinely seem like they're having a good time, which is like, hey, look, testament to the name. They're having lunches together, because we encourage them. We give them a budget every month. And it's like, come on, spend that money, go out there. And you can't have lunch together unless you're in the office. So they go out for lunches frequently. Every quarter, we take them out on like a little trip. And I think like ever since that change, we've seen, first of all, the productivity is skyrocketed, but also they just seem so much happier together. So challenge. I think the important thing to note with that story is that the way that you implement something like a monitoring system is you have to be very delicate and very considered with the way that you send that messaging out to the team. And that's why we sent Zui over to Vietnam, right? We're not going to just randomly implement that from New Zealand. That just seems a little bit too disconnected, and I can imagine that they might not have taken it as well. But Zui being there to physically put in the effort to show up and explain to them why we're doing this, I think that really built a lot of rapport.
What about when it comes to building product and the actual development of things?
So a challenge that we had was, I alluded to it at the beginning with like the cultural differences in Vietnam. For context, the Vietnamese team work in a very like rigid way. It's like, okay, you give me my sprint's worth of work, the due dates, the expectations, and I will do them. I will do them to the letter, which is great, but it also presents its own challenges, right? As I said, to the letter. So if you give them too much detail, they get lost in the sauce. They can't really operate. If you don't give them enough, for example, if we're wireframing up a project, we can't have ambiguity in the wireframes. right? Something we've learned through iteration and planning. Same with the use cases. The use cases have to be clear enough that they understand the workflow that's expected and the related workflow of the wireframes. And we've had initial problems, not so much now, where we would hand off a project, and because we're not there physically to answer their questions at night, because they start like afternoon and then work into the night, they'll produce something that is just not what we're hoping for and not intending.
Right.
But when you look back at it, you're like, oh, yeah, and I absolutely see why you created that, because there was this wireframe that had this image that was not clear with the use case. So they just made an assumption, because to them it's like, I need to get this done by the due date, that they would just produce work, and then you'd go test it and you're like, oh, whoa, this is like completely wrong. And so then you'd have to work backwards with them. Naturally, they'd be like, oh, but I don't understand. Like this is what you said. And it's like, okay, reading between the lines, we were making the assumption that you understood that this drop down would have these options instead of just an open text field. Something small like that. But it created a lot of rework. And so what we've now learned is that on top of the culture, on top of understanding that they want to work in a certain way, we now also have to be mindful that maybe due to a lack of understanding from like English to Vietnamese, but also just the way that they work, we need to give them a level of detail that does not open the door to ambiguity. And that was a challenge, because now you give them too much detail, they get lost and they're like, whoa, I don't know what to do. So that was a big challenge. And that's something that we've had to come to terms with over many projects.
How do you take them on that product journey? When you're building a new feature, you tell everyone, hey, we're doing this because this is what our users want. How do you make sure that they're still engaged with the product vision and where you're going with product, and have enough context to be able to build?
Oh, absolutely. This goes for the New Zealand team as well. I think it's anyone who's touching the product should understand the vision and understand why you're doing things. Great point. So when I started in this role, which has been about a year and a half now, I realized that I didn't see a lot of regular communication with the entire business. And this goes beyond product, right? This for context for the listeners. We have Trail as a software, which is a CRM built for financial advisors. But we also have a business that we would call like a sister business, which attaches services on top of the software that sit outside the software's scope. So like compliance, file reviews, ensuring that the financial advisors are providing compliant advice, because in New Zealand, it's a regulated area. Events. So for context, when I say the whole business, I mean both of these businesses. What I found was that there was no cohesion between these two businesses. So together with my manager and founder, Chuck, we decided that what we'll do is we'll create monthly presentations where we will present our thoughts, the vision that we're trying to achieve, and the decision making behind why we've prioritized certain projects versus others throughout the month. And we've done that regularly for the last 12 months, which has meant that the Vietnamese team are in this call as well. And what we do is we talk about the updates to the vision, because we're always trying to make sure that we're capturing the right move at the right time based on the market and based on what we want to achieve for our vision. We try to translate that to the entire business so that everybody's on the same page, so that they know when they're talking to their users or their clients on a one-on-one, that they can share the same sentiment that everyone else is, so that there's a consistent communication across the board. And for the development and product team, they can understand why we've decided to prioritize certain projects over the other. So that's what we've found has been very effective for the Vietnamese team. It's just doing our best to try and include them and give them as much information as reasonably possible. Of course, again, not too much detail about why we do these things.
And have you found that has had a positive impact in general into the way that you guys build product at the moment?
Absolutely. It's been a mixture of, educating the Vietnamese team both on the vision, but the financial services sector as a whole, because a lot of what our software hinges on is understanding how advisors actually work and provide advice. And I found that over time, when we're doing a technical scoping and planning of a project, that the questions that the developers are asking, and this is across the board, are really great questions that seriously take into consideration the user behavior and what we're trying to achieve with the project. So I'm continuously impressed by how much they can take on board, and how much that helps when it comes to planning together.
Yeah, I can totally imagine that. If somebody is listening right now and they're thinking, I really want to have a remote team in a different country, what would be some of the tips and tricks that you would recommend that person follows at a high level?
Well, we'll start with the theme for both our Philippines and Vietnam team, which is find the person that you trust, that understands your culture and understands what you're trying to achieve as a business. That will become your star player and the person that you will probably lean on a lot to then find others. Tip number one is find that person. Hard, take your time, because this person will be extremely important to the growth of that arm of your business. Second tip, understand and respect their culture. Respect goes two ways, right? I'm not saying every business does this, but I've definitely heard of stories where businesses take on these employees and expect them to follow the exact way that they work in their current country. Understand that that doesn't always work. You have to respect the fact that you're bringing on people that have been raised in a completely different place with a completely different outlook on life, and that you can come together and work with these cultural differences if you just respect each other and try to learn more about each other's culture. That's tip number two. You want to create a win-win. You want to create fans in the business. You don't want to create
Mhm.
you don't want to just hire a person
Not
and then
that,
just treat them like, oh, you're just some random admin person that we hired. That's not going to create an effective team.
right. So they're really part of the team.
Absolutely. They're not just a name on Slack. They are just as important as the people that sit next to you. And so you have to treat them as such. You will create fans within the business, and that will seep into every other person on that international team, right? Like, culture is so thick that like it infects people if you're doing it right. I think the third tip is, if you want to start introducing ways that you monitor, is the only word I can currently think of, your overseas employees, that's fine. Either, like we did, we had a team for 3 years. We then went over to the country to introduce this. We had the resources to achieve this. If you don't, that's fine. But maybe consider at the beginning of this new venture taking into account if that's a part of what you believe is necessary, so that you can train the first person and instill this level of understanding, so that every subsequent hire doesn't feel like they're suddenly, like, later down the line, being like a part of Big Brother, which could affect the culture. Again, if you have to do that, my like final tip is just be very mindful when you're implementing things like that. There's nothing wrong
Mm.
with it. It's just take into consideration the impact that you can have on some people's mental, where they feel like you don't trust them. And trust is so
Mm.
important when you're working remote. That's the pillar
Yeah,
of working remote, right? You have to.
100%.
You have to. So be careful with your trust. Treat it very, very delicately. When you're introducing
Yep.
things, always take that angle before you just go out there and say something wrong.
I really love that you guys actually take the effort to go and visit the different teams in the different countries. That actually adds an extra layer of personality and really brings people together. So that's a great tip as well, I think.
Yes, yeah, true. I mean, I'm still waiting for my ticket to the Philippines and Vietnam, but no, I mean, it'll be fun. It'll be fun when it eventually happens. I'm hoping. No, I'm sure it will. But yeah, absolutely. Like, we also brought so the person who manages the Philippines, his name's Carl. He lives in Manila.
Mm,
We also brought him over to New Zealand when we first hired him, and he
right.
stayed with me, and I like showed him around the
Oh, that's
country for a little
awesome.
bit. Like, and I think, again, it's like all about building rapport. If you can, it goes so far. That, I think, really helped us solidify like a strong connection in the Philippines.
And Kind of moving into the workplace culture a little bit more deeply, why is it that you think that culture is so important for product teams?
To me, product is first and foremost a very client facing role, but it also requires a lot of collaboration. You can get things wrong through miscommunication, or you might not be able to have these open conversations about real feedback where you have disagreements in a project without building strong rapport with your teammates. For me, in the way that I've been raised in this business, you have to find the balance where you can have really hard conversations with your team members about performance issues, about attitude issues in the workplace, where it's quite difficult to do that if you have a really hierarchical relationship. Unfortunately, for whatever reason, people from experience don't really take well to just having a manager employee relationship. And the way that I've been raised in Trail is like, we're all friends, we all respect each other, we trust each other, and therefore we can be honest with each other. When everyone is on the same page, everything works so much more smoothly. And that all stems from culture. Ultimately, that's all culture, right? Like it's how you interact, it's your outlook on life. We have these values in the workplace. It's like bring your whole self to work, always moving forward and get it done. And I think that first one, bring your whole self to work, is such an important value for us because we are unabashedly ourselves. And that's a good thing. We should be proud of who we are. We shouldn't feel stifled at work. We shouldn't feel like I'm just here to do a job. No, we're here to create something great together. We're here to bring value to the financial advice services industry. We're all here to push forward together. And if we aren't on the same page, then we're not going to move forward together. And culture, I think, is a big proponent of that because it seeps into everything you do. Every interaction you have on a daily basis ultimately comes from the culture of the business and how people feel in the business and how they feel towards the business.
At what point are you too friendly and you kind of lose sight of that work relationship? And is that important, or can you just never really get to that point?
Oh no, you can get to that point, all right. Absolutely. No. That is something that I have dealt with. I don't know if the listeners or the viewers can get the vibe, but I'm quite an open guy. I'm a very
Yeah.
friendly person, and coming into this role, my immediate reaction was I want to be friends with all my team members. It's like almost like trying to be a cool dad. It's like, oh, I'm the cool guy.
Yeah.
I'm the cool manager.
Like you want to be the nice manager.
Yeah. Everybody's going to be my friend. And then you quickly realize that this becomes really difficult because they become, and this is really like hard, it's almost contradictory to what I just said, but they become too familiar, and it becomes this issue where you're trying to find the balance between being casual, relaxed, but still as effective as possible. We try to be really lean in Trail. So everyone has to be on their A game, right? We need to be effective as a team, and there's no faffing about here, right? We have to keep going. When you become too familiar and too casual, it's like you're hanging out with a mate. And when you're hanging out with mates, you don't want to be super bogged down by stressful stuff, like you want to hang, you want to chill. And I've definitely had that problem where I had to sit them down, and I had to do this for my whole team. I had one-on-ones with them, so I had to sit them down. This actually happened recently, and I had to talk them through and say, look, we're friends. We hang out outside of work. It's great. I love that. It's so cool. We can have great conversations. However, because of that, when we're at work, we have to realize that we're at work. We're here to do a job. We need to understand that there is a level that's expected of all of us when we step through the door.
I just wanted to ask if you feel like as a manager, there needs to be like a certain level of respect. People need to understand that like you're still the manager. Do you find that being too friendly also makes that harder? Or do you think that it's more just the banter and the kind of distraction that maybe comes with being friends with your workmates?
I think that depends on the person. I don't think I've had a problem with the respect part. And that's because the reason I want to be friends with my teammates is because if you give, you get what you give. I'm very open with them about my life. I'm very honest with them. And I absolutely respect every single one of them. And I show them that through being close with them. And I love my team because, I've had these conversations and they're amazing. The way that they took it was like just incredible. And I think it's because we have built this respect together that they do understand he's my manager. We're at work. We've got to do it. It does not feel like there's any animosity between us.
And how have you found that having this really tight-knit but open work culture has impacted the quality of your work and your ability to produce high-level product and features?
Oh, it's great. I mean, we're so effective as a team. Erica, she's my junior product owner. She's been doing such a great job progressing because of, we have a culture of constant feedback, but also her drive to just continue to work and try to produce results. She's very proactive. And I think that does stem from the culture of Trail. Phoebe, who's a part of my team, she's the senior. She's been super helpful, providing really valuable input from her experience. Lexi, my UX UI designer, she's come from like great experience and she's been bringing all this great process improvement. And I think that's all because we're cultivating this ability to be upfront with each other, right? And we can provide feedback in a way that's honest and we don't have an ego and we don't feel like you're insulting. We get heated sometimes, definitely. We have our own opinions, of course, and the beauty of it is that we all speak our opinions and sometimes they clash, but that's the best part. When you get these clashes, that's when you create something great out of it.
Totally. And I guess for somebody that is, for a product manager that is struggling a little bit with their work culture and doesn't know where to start or how to change it, do you have any tips for that?
Yeah, first I would start with what is your culture? Recognize the culture that you have, recognize the culture that you want, because you can't start singing from the same song sheet if you don't even know what the song sheet is. So, number one, sit down either with your executive team or maybe just by yourself if it's an internal thing, and really just consider what is it that you want the culture to be? What are your values? Like I listed our 3 values. What are your 3 values? And then you can start to consider, okay, well, you know, I've got 5 team members that I work with. Do they show any of these values? You want to have A players, right? Because that's how you're going to get the most effectiveness. And some people are Bs that can be brought up to an A through like coaching and through mentorship. But when it comes to culture, it's also a matter of what's their personality? What are their values? What do they care about? Everybody is an independent person, and it's not an expectation that everybody will be the exact same. That's just not possible, right? So you need to determine your values and then start to have conversations with your teammates on a one-to-one basis where you start to promote these values and you see how they react to them, see how they take them on board. It'll take some time, but what I think you should try to achieve is this open level of communication where you can determine basically, like, is this person going to fit these values that I want? And then you have to start having some hard conversations, which we've had in the business in the past, where it's like, all right, this person just doesn't fit our values. And that's creating problems within the team because we have a set of A players that definitely share these values and we get along so well. And then we have a set of these players that just don't, they're like A players in their own right. They do amazing work, but they just don't get the culture. And it creates abrasive interactions in the office and when you're working together, where it's just really hard to get on the same page and come to a good conclusion.
The values are so important and often overlooked. Some people think it's a bit woo-woo, but I think they're really key. You mentioned that one of the reasons why you love product is because of getting user feedback and really listening to that user and trying to solve their pain points. I always thought that user feedback is one of the hardest things about building product. What are your high-level thoughts on user feedback? How do you get it? What are some challenges that you have with it?
Users are like the lifeblood of any product, right? As a SaaS business, we need users. Without users, we're nothing. However, as a SaaS product and for Trail specifically, we have a vision in mind about where we want the product to go and how we will revolutionize the financial services industry in New Zealand. My thoughts on user feedback are all of it's important with a grain of salt. The challenge that I have specifically to begin with is I come from a support background. So I'm used to getting all the feedback because I used to interface with the clients on a daily basis, and I would interface with hundreds of them over like a week. And naturally, one thing that I learned over a long time is that we've built a great piece of software that we believe should be used in a certain manner. Not everybody uses the software in that way. And everybody has, especially in this industry, their own methodology about what works for them. And I had to learn that just because they were giving what I believed was good feedback because I empathized with them, it didn't actually match the vision of the software. And it wasn't a great use of our time because they were trying to give me a solution that only works for them, that might not work for
Right.
any other user. Then, as I talked about vision, it's like, well, if you have a strong vision and you know where you want the software to go, you won't just build things willy-nilly, right? You'll be able to verify feedback against your vision, and also vice versa. If you're getting overwhelming amounts of feedback from users, you can also reconsider what your vision is. And I think having a strong vision means that user feedback becomes so much more important because then you can validate your vision, but you can also utilize it to basically challenge your vision. So I don't blindly go in and just take on every piece of feedback. Absolutely not. I always like to think of the pain. If users are providing feedback, it's because they're finding pain in their business. Either it's on trail or maybe it's actually outside of trail. And what I've learned is diagnosing pain is so much more powerful than taking on solutions, right? If you get to the source of the pain, then you might find that they think they know what the solution is. But when you learn about their pain, you can create an even more effective, better solution that will actually solve a lot more pain in the industry.
How do you then go about telling those users that are saying, hey, I need this feature? How do you tell them actually this is not the direction that we're going?
First of all, knowing where I want the software to head and knowing our vision as a business is so important because it's something you can fall back on always. But you're right that users want the software to go in many different directions because they have their own stakes in it. The way I tackle these conversations is, like I just said before, the first thing I always do is if they come at me with solutions, I immediately start to question the why. There's the whole idea of like 5 whys. If you ask why 5 times, you'll get to the source of things. What they're trying to solve is the pain, right? They think they have the solution in mind, but they have to understand the pain that they're trying to solve. When they can understand the pain, then I can start to pick that apart and say, look, I know you really want to do this in your business. I understand that this is a business decision that works best for you. Our vision for the software is this. And you want to really show them the grand picture. I just tell them, I'm like, this is our vision for the industry. This is currently where we're sitting. This is why, based on legislative change, based on the pain in the industry, beyond just your pain, how we think we can provide value to your clients. When you can translate that vision and be very open with it, you build a level of trust with your users. And I've found most of the time, if not all, I've never had a bad interaction, or I've never finished an interaction with negative feelings by doing that. And they appreciate that. I found that they just want to be heard and they respond so well to just being open and honest. Don't faff about with, oh, yeah, we can do that, because they hate that. Because then they get hopes up. 12 months down the line, you actually turn around and say, no, we're not doing that. And then they get really irritated with you. You might as well set the parameters up straight and then just go with that. If they find that that's just not what they want, the truth is we're not going to bend over backwards for one client with a specific pain point that they really want. That just doesn't benefit the users or the industry. We don't want you to leave. We hope you continue to use it, and we'll do our best to support you, coach you, train you to use it in the most effective way. But you know what? It's like a relationship, and every client is a unique relationship, and you've got to treat it as such.
You should have gone into sales. You would have done well.
Where, like I said, I joined with the intention to, and then I ended up here instead.
Oh, funny. Hey, thanks so much. I just have one more question that I ask every guest. What is something that you wish you could tell your younger self when you were just getting started on your first product role?
I would tell younger Farran, it's okay to make mistakes. You're learning. It's okay if you don't really get it all. Your brain is still smooth. Let it become wrinkly. You're learning. And that's the whole beauty of learning. You're continuously learning. So don't stress yourself out on, that project wasn't the greatest release, or, I didn't plan that to a certain degree. of detail. Oh, I had to go back and forth with the devs, and the timeline blew out by 3 or 4 weeks or 2 or 3 sprints. That's fine. Just take on board the learnings and make sure that you actually grow from that, rather than just wallowing in your own self-defeat every time. It doesn't help anybody. And with your team members, like, it's okay if you're not on the same page managing people. That's normal. You're going to have hard conversations. You are a manager, right? At the end of the day, you are managing a team. And with that comes great responsibility to be upfront, honest, and have some hard conversations with people. Don't run from them. The more you run from them, the harder it gets. The more you run from them in your life with conflict, the harder it gets. Just go for it. Just do it.
Love it. So make sure that you're talking to people honestly and openly, and don't run away from
Don't
hard
run.
conversations. I love
Yep.
it. Awesome. Thank you so much, Farran. It's been great to chat to you, and we'll see you later.
Thank you, Giulia. It's been a pleasure. It's great. Thank you so much.
All right. And that's a wrap for another Product Tales podcast. If you'd like to share your own product tales with us, please contact us via the contact information in the show notes. We would love to have you as a podcast guest or just get your feedback. Bye for now.